Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you are new here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in February that were written by Black authors. I tried really hard to participate in as many Blackathon events hosted by Jessie from Bowties and Books. I went to several live shows that they hosted and tried to interact in the chat and do as much as I physically could. So I did my best. I did manage to read 9 books by Black authors this month, and in my next video I'm going to be talking about all of the books by non-Black authors I managed to get to. I didn't read all Black voices this month because my library holds came in on certain things, and I also tend to reread a lot, so some of my rereads were not by Black authors as well. So that will be a separate video. And I'm going to talk the lowest rated to the highest rated. Unfortunately, my lowest rated book by a Black author I read this month was I'm So Not Over You by Kisoko Jackson. This is a own voices, men loving men contemporary romance featuring Kiem and Hudson, and they used to date, and 6 months prior to the events of the novel they broke up, and this is the story of them kind of rekindling their love and getting back together. And so this has a fake dating trope where they're pretending to date even after they've broken up to like appease Hudson's parents, and this is a, you know, second chance MLM romance, and both men are Black. There were a couple issues I had with this novel. I was really enjoying it up to about the 30 or 40% mark. However, I started getting quite annoyed with our main character Kiem. We only get Kiem's point of view, and you don't hear me say this very often, but I would have loved to see Hudson's point of view as well, because obviously it felt very one-sided in the relationship. We knew why Kiem was attracted to Hudson, why he wanted to be with Hudson, but we didn't really get to see why Hudson was into Kiem. So that dynamic just felt a little off in terms of the execution. And I found Kiem quite annoying as the main character, to be honest. He is 23 at, you know, in this novel, and I'm 27, so really we're in the same ballpark of ages, but he felt so immature for a 23-year-old, and he a kind of a nitpicky thing, but one of the things he talks about is he starts dating a 31-year-old, and the author goes out of his way to describe the wrinkles around this 31-year-old's eyes and how old they look, and like that was super strange to me because 31 is not old as someone who is approaching 30. But it just really showed the immaturity of Kiem, excuse me. So that just really didn't vibe with me. He had other Zoomer references. You could really tell that this was written by a young author who was part of Gen Z, and it showed and it bothered me. As it just didn't click with me. But if you are of that age group and, you know, you understand the references, you have this type of sense of humor, I think this book could really work for maybe someone slightly younger than me. But yeah, just Kiem and we didn't vibe. I didn't vibe with the writing on this one. This just didn't super work for me. Also, I think I'm just not, this is the third book I've read that has a second chance romance element, and I didn't like any of them. So maybe second chance romance just isn't a trope that I am into. So I ended up giving I'm So Not Over You 2 stars. Then we have my queen, my love, Talia Hibbert, and unfortunately this was a Talia Hibbert that I did not like, and that was Mary Inkmas. Now, the reason I'm reading a Christmas romance in February is that because during December, I couldn't access any Christmas romances because that's when everyone wants to read them. It makes sense. And this was just available at my library, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give this a try and maybe recommend it around Christmas time for others. This one is about a tattoo artist named Cash and a young woman named Bailey, and she ends up quitting her job, and Cash hires Bailey as his like front desk receptionist at his tattoo shop. So this is a kind of a workplace romance in a way, but also there is an element of the Christmas thing where Bailey's mom had passed away. She was raised by a single mom, and her mom had passed previous to the story, and so she was going to spend Christmas alone. And obviously Cash invites Bailey to his family's for Christmas. So there's a little bit of a Christmas element. There's a little bit of a tattoo industry exploration. There's also a subplot that has to do with one of Bailey's friends named John, who is homeless, and Cash and Bailey kind of band together to help John stay safe during the holiday season, make sure he has food and a coat and everything that he needs, a place to stay, and then Cash eventually helps John find a job and really get back on his feet. So that was a super lovely element to this story as well. So this is a pretty short story. I would classify this as a novella, and I unfortunately didn't think that the length suited the amount of subplots we had going on. I either wanted more of the Christmas elements, more of the tattooing elements, or more of the helping the homeless element. If this book had been maybe 100 more pages, to be honest, I think all three of those elements could have been fleshed out completely, as well as, obviously this is a romance novel, so the romance could have been the overarching plot with these separate elements going on. I think it could have been fleshed out that way. I have a few nitpicks as someone who is tattooed, who I consume a lot of tattoo content on YouTube and TikTok. Some of Cash's point of view as a tattoo artist really bothered me in a very nitpicky way. He calls the machine a tattoo gun, which is kind of a big no-no. It's not a gun. It doesn't pierce you. It's a tattoo machine is the technical term. And this could be a difference between American tattoo industry versus UK, because this book is set in the UK. Talia Hibbert is a British author, so that could be the discrepancy. But I know it's a big pet peeve of a lot of tattoo artists that people refer to the machine as a tattoo gun, and it then subsequently bothered me. So that's just like a really small nitpicky thing. At one point, Bailey is getting tattooed for the first time, and she's getting a massive thigh piece. Okay, and as a person who has a massive thigh piece, the way that she was describing getting tattooed in that particular area was utterly ridiculous. And I understand everyone has a different pain tolerance, but Bailey describes it as not hurting at all. But with a thigh piece, there are so many different spots that hurt differently. So on the top of the thigh, the sensation is different than on the inner thigh and the outer thigh. So for me, the inner thigh was very tender and very spicy in terms of pain, versus the top and the other side of the thigh, which were much less intense, and I could handle it a little bit more. So I would have been, I don't know, again, a nitpicky thing because I am tattooed in that area. The fact that she said like, oh, I was just able to zone out and I didn't feel a thing, stuck out to me as being a little ridiculous. But my main issue with this book, besides the nitpicky tattoo things, because I'm a tattooed person who loves tattoo culture, putting all of that aside, the main issue I had with the romance of this book is that Cash has a lot of baggage, and so does Bailey. And the way that they resolve their issues as a couple is Cash's mom has to talk to Bailey about Cash's past to explain why he behaves the way he behaves, so Bailey can go after him and they can have like their makeup moment and they can talk about their feelings finally, which I find utterly ridiculous and such a cop-out. Like, Cash should have been the one to talk to Bailey about his past and to explain a little bit more about why he's behaving the way he's behaving and what his issue with starting a romantic relationship are because of his past. And so I really didn't like that element at all. So this was not the romance for me. I ended up giving it, initially I kind of liked it. I gave it a 3-star, but after kind of sitting with it and just really not liking the mom element, I ended up dropping it down to like a 2.5 stars. This was just not for me. Next, I have a 3.5-star read, which is called The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. This is about a woman named Lena. Had to check my notes. This is about Lena, who is a Afro-Latinx woman from a Brazilian culture, getting together with a white man. So this is an interracial romance, as was the previous book, by the way. Sorry I didn't mention that representation. So Lena used to be engaged to Max's older brother. And so this is a like a brother trope. I don't quite know what that's called. But basically throughout the course of the plot of this book is that years after Lena was left at the altar by Max's older brother, Lena and Max are forced to work together to pitch basically a marketing idea to a large hotel chain so that Lena, who is a wedding planner, can coordinate and be a wedding planner for the hotel, and Max can be like the head of the marketing team for the hotel. So they're both like helping each other to get positions with this very prestigious hotel. And I did like this book. I gave it a 3.5 stars. It took me about 50% of the book to really get invested in our two characters. I felt that Lena, some of her personality traits were just not my favorite. She was pretty petty in the beginning of the book. She was kind of sniping at Max a lot. And I mean, she has reasoning behind it, but at the same time, it just was very kind of off-putting. And she also has this thing about not showing any emotion at all ever, and thinks that emotions are a weakness. And that is just a character dynamic and a personality trait that I personally don't jive with. So it took me about halfway through the novel to get behind these two characters and to start to feel for them. But then the second half of the book, I really started to believe in them, believe in their romance, and to enjoy the overall plot. They get into some antics. There's some drama because the older brother starts to be involved and is a little possessive about Lena. And so I was enjoying kind of the latter half of the book a little bit more than the beginning. So overall, a pretty fun romance, not a favorite of mine, but I did have a good time reading this, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then we worked through some Octavia Butler books. Octavia Butler is probably one of my favorite authors now. I've been trying to read everything that she's written, and this month I was able to finish the Xenogenesis trilogy, the final book being Imago, I believe is how you pronounce this. This, unfortunately, is probably my least favorite of the trilogy. So I will give you a summary of book 1. As this is book 3, I do not want to spoil it. So basically, humanity has destroyed itself through nuclear war, and a group of aliens comes across Earth and rescues a few individuals who have survived the apocalypse and keeps them in a cryogenic sleep until all of the radiation on Earth disappears after several hundred years. The aliens decide to help the humans repopulate the planet, but at a very steep cost. And this is the third and final book in this trilogy, and the reason I gave this a 3.5 stars, I think. Yes, I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The reason I didn't love this book as much as book 1 or book 2 is because at this point we kind of understood the culture of the aliens and the human culture that was being cultivated. But so at this point, a lot of that world building was getting a little repetitive. I felt that the author was kind of re-explaining things over and over and over again. So by the time we got to this book, it felt a little like I'd already heard this information before, and even some of the plot points felt so similar to other plot points that had happened in book 1 and book 2. So we do explore some different themes and a slightly different spin on some things that had happened in book 1 and 2, but it felt very similar to the other 2 books. So unfortunately, this wasn't my favorite of the trilogy, but I do still enjoy what Octavia Butler was able to do with this trilogy, and it's hard to say that I enjoyed it because the themes in here are so heavy and so messed up. The alien-human relationship is really unsettling. So it's hard to say I enjoyed it, but it was such an interesting exploration, and I have to hats off to Octavia Butler for crafting such an interesting set of character dynamics and this interesting alien-human experience. So that's all I'll say on this one. I do recommend the series, but I think check the trigger warnings, especially for book 1. There is an attempted rape scene. There is a lot of manipulation going on. Kind of this idea of eugenics is happening, so just be wary picking up this series. Another Octavia Butler book I managed to read and finish was Wild Seed by Octavia Butler, and this is book 1 in her Pattern Master series. But what's really interesting is Octavia's first book ever was the 4th book in this quartet. So she wrote Pattern Master first, and then she wrote 3 essentially prequels to that book. So I decided to read it, prequels first, and not in publication order. And Wild Seed is about, how do I put this? This is about 2 immortal beings. One is named Doro and one is Anyanwu, and Doro has a couple of magical powers where he can sense other magical beings, and he also can inhabit the body of a dead person. So he is basically a spirit that just moves from body to body, and he can kill people instantly and take over their body, and then he is that person. Very scary. And Anyanwu, he comes across Anyanwu, who is living in a village in Africa. This is during the 1600s, by the way, when this story starts. And Anyanwu is a healer. She can shapeshift, and she is immortal and cannot die. So Doro convinces Anyanwu to come with him and be a part of his breeding program. Doro is trying to put magical beings together to create even stronger magical children for some reason. So that's the plot, and it's very uncomfortable. I gave this book 4 stars. I took off a star because of just how uncomfortable this concept was to me. There's a lot of incest in this book, and this idea of breeding people to get the best magical stock. Very disturbing and very uncomfortable. However, the things that I enjoyed about this book was the character dynamic between Doro and Anyanwu, because Anyanwu will not just lay down and take it. She defies Doro at every turn, and it's kind of their relationship and their character dynamic between the two of them that I find the most fascinating, because Doro feels like he can do anything because he can kill people whenever he wants and take over their bodies, and then he can use those bodies how he sees fit, if you get my meaning. And Anyanwu does everything in her power to kind of resist and to try and get him to stop doing this thing that he's doing. This has a really satisfying ending to me. I really enjoyed how these two characters and the resolution of these two characters and their arc. I will be continuing the series, but I need a little bit of a break just because of how uncomfortable it made me with the eugenics, the breeding program, the power imbalance of Doro and Anyanwu. Like, Doro is just so much more powerful and he can get away with so much that power imbalance really bothered me. And, you know, issues of consent, obviously. There were also, like, it's in the 1600s, and so we see slave ships and people getting taken away to go to the Americas to become slaves, and that was really upsetting. So just, again, be careful when picking up this book and its sequels. We do travel through time a little bit because Doro and Anyanwu are immortal, so I think by the end of the book we are in like the mid 1800s. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I will be continuing the Pattern Master Quartet at some point. Really quickly, I will say I did reread Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I've read this so many times now, and this, I just really needed my Chloe. I was having kind of a bad flare-up of my fibromyalgia, and I needed a strong fibromyalgia character to give me a boost, and that's exactly what this is. This is about Chloe and Red and them falling in love, and Chloe has fibromyalgia just like me. So I adore this series, I adore this book, and again, Talia Hibbert, despite having a flop with Mary Incamus, this still holds up for me, and I really enjoy revisiting these characters. My nonfiction read of this month was Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This is about the history of racism and how racism was carefully crafted over the years, starting in the 1600s colonial America, and how it was crafted through legislation and policy to become what it is today. And the lens that the author chose to go with is he follows 5 pretty infamous historical figures and kind of uses their lens to discuss the particular time period. And so I thought that was a really interesting and wise choice. We follow Thomas Jefferson, William Lord Garrison, W.E.B. Du Bois, Angela Davis, and a preacher named Cotton Mathers. So through their eyes, their lens, their writings, their teachings, we get to see kind of how racism evolved through time. This was really well done, in my opinion. This is a 5-star nonfiction for me. There was so much in here that it was hard for me to even comprehend everything, but I think this was done in such a masterful way, the way that it was told through these lenses, and it was so well researched. You could just tell the amount of care that went into this nonfiction. I think if you're interested in a historical kind of account of racism in America, I think this is a must. I read the full version. Ibram X. Kendi came out with a children's or a young readers version and an abridged version because it is so long. But I decided to read the full version. So you can consume this however you choose, but I think that the full version was the correct choice for me personally. And so yeah, I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars, and I recommend it to everyone within reason. If you are a Black person, you do not need to read this because you feel the effects of racism, so you don't need to open yourself up to that type of trauma. Really quickly, I will also mention I read Passing by Nella Larson. This is a classic written by a Black woman, and I absolutely adore this story. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I have a full review up for this book and its movie adaptation on my channel, and that will be linked as well. So you can check out my full thoughts and feelings about this classic in that video. But again, 5 out of 5 stars for this. And my last book that I read, probably my favorite thing I read in February, was Work For It by Talia Hibbert. Again, Talia Hibbert is my queen. This is a male-male romance featuring 2 Black men in a small town in the English countryside. This romance was so stinking sweet and angsty. It balanced these characters, these 2 men who are very angsty, and the tenderness of them coming together was so sweet that it made my heart absolutely melt for these 2. This follows Olu and Griff kind of works on a farm, and Olu is a big time London. He used to be a lawyer, but he's kind of trying to find himself again, and he goes to the countryside to kind of escape and get away. And Olu starts to work on the farm as a temporary employee, which is how they interact. And Griff is such a big softie, and Olu is so angsty that I think the 2 characters really balance each other out. I don't think Griff, it's not really a grumpy sunshine, it's like a grumpy. Both of these characters are a little grumpy, but once you crack the shell of them, Griff is one of the sweetest men I've ever read. And Olu, while having problems, he's such a strong character, and he tries to work through them so much. These 2 men, watching them get together was truly a delight. And honestly, the lead up to them holding hands was so tender and loving that when they finally held hands for the first time, I cried. Legitimately, tears coming down my face, crying, because it was so sweet and tender. So anytime they held hands, I was crying my eyes out. This has very intense smut, so very good there, but it was overall the emotional vulnerability of these 2 and how they got together that really swept me off my feet and made me love them so desperately. I cried 3 times during this book. 3 times. It was so lovely, and I highly recommend it. This was probably one of my favorite Talia Hibbert books I've read. You know, it's up there with the Brown Sisters trilogy, and I will continue to read through her backlist just because I adored this one so much. That is it. Those were the 9 books by Black authors I read during Black History Month, during Blackathon. I want to say thank you so much for watching. Leave any comments down below that you have, and I will see you in my second wrap up very soon. Bye.